Back. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you very
Good.
much. Yeah, busy day as per usual. How about
Yeah.
you?
I'm still adjusting. I just moved
Yeah.
into like a little spot, so in a camper, so still adjusting, but
Is it
you know,
hot there at the moment?
it is. It gets, especially inside of a camper, it's like a hot tin can.
God. Because it's 11 in the morning where you are now, isn't it?
Yes,
Roughly.
it
Yeah, yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we did part one,
Yeah.
and we covered a few things in part one. Did quite a bit of your life story, but I think we wanted to pick back up from where we were talking about your ex-wife, and just sort of maybe do a quick recap of what we talked about in part one. Just a small recap, just in case anyone's missed it.
Sure. So it basically began in my childhood, being trafficked by my father to doctors. He ended my mom's life through chemical agent, a slow poisoning. And then I ended up, just this is a very short recap, I ended up in a marriage 30 years later where the same thing happened to me. And my wife had likely Munchausen and Munchausen by proxy and psychopathy, and was slowly ending my life the same way, all $4 million, just like my dad had before.
And we were talking about how that is the most bizarre chain of events, that runs parallel to your childhood. And I actually still couldn't stop thinking about that after the first podcast, because I just thought, how unlikely is that scenario going to play out again? It's because it's such a traumatic and wild thing to happen. To have it happen twice
And,
is,
oh,
yeah,
I'm
go on.
sorry.
Sorry, no,
I've
you
gotten a
you
lot I've
go.
gotten a lot of lashback because people don't believe my story. But the thing that I think people, if you haven't dealt with or deconstructed from trauma, if you haven't studied it, that you don't understand, or that sometimes people don't understand, is that it's the people who have wild things like that happen in their childhood that will often see it repeat. And when you have something like dissociative amnesia and some memory loss, temporary memory loss, like I had, you repeat cycles and you don't even understand or realize that you're doing it. And so, and I've also had a lot of people reach out on social media recently who have been like, I think that that's happening to me too. And so the thing is, we don't get to talk about it a lot, not even with our doctors, because you're told you're the problem, you're crazy. So I think it's something, not that it happens all the time every day, but I think it happens more frequently than we actually know.
And I do think you're right. I think people do repeat their past. And you are drawn to what you're comfortable with,
Mhm.
and it's normal behaviour. The way you are brought up, as much as you understand that it's not quite as normal when you're older, at the time when it's happening, you know no different. And so when you do, you still revert back to that very kind of basic feeling that you have,
Mhm.
because it's that comfort zone. It's all you've known, and it is normal for people that have been abused to go back to abusers, not just once. It
Yeah.
can happen continuously.
Yeah.
So I understand how that's happened to you, but I just think that's, it's such a wild story for it to
Yeah.
happen twice. But I'm so glad you're sharing it on this platform, because
Thank you.
I find it very interesting. And you want to pick up then where we left off with your ex-wife?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
go
I
for it.
made a couple of notes. I'm not
Yeah,
exactly
sure.
sure where I left
Yeah,
off, but
yeah,
there were
that's
two
fine.
things that were really important that I wanted to discuss. Number one is it's important to note that she practiced on my animals before she started harming me. So looking back, there's one specific incident where I took a cat to the vet, and all of a sudden, when the cats would have health issues, we wouldn't have money. And this is someone who works for one of the biggest tech companies in the world, so it was always odd. And one cat, it usually ended up that I was like, no, I'm taking them to the vet. I don't care. I took one to the vet, and he was ranked the number one vet in the state that we were in. And he kept saying, "Your cat's been poisoned. Your cat's been poisoned." And my wife wouldn't go with me to this appointment. And I was like, there's no way. Like, I don't use chemicals to clean. I'm like, I don't understand what she could have gotten into. There's nothing in the house except for there's ant bait in a locked trash can inside of it. There's no way she could have gotten to it. And he was just insistent that she gotten poisoned. But in the meantime, my ex-wife she was always scheming, always researching things. Looking back retrospectively, I understand that now. And she said, push this idea that it's a food protein allergy. And he finally acquiesced. He was finally like, I don't agree. There are a lot of symptoms, like she would just fall over randomly when she was walking. All of these things that were happening to my cat and to other cats, it's just, over a decade, ended up happening to me just before I escaped. I would just fall, just be walking and just have a drop attack. So she was practicing on my animals before that, which breaks my heart because I am very much an animal lover. But, they say with things like psychopathy, and I don't know if she did this in her childhood or in the past, I have no idea. But they say with things like psychopathy, that's usually the first step is animals. So
I mean, it's such a calculated and premeditated thing to carry this through. It to the point of how many years was it that she was doing this for?
we were together for 10 years and we knew each
Wow.
other 10 years earlier than that.
And do you think you were being poisoned for the 10 years?
Yes. So that is a great segue into the other point that I wanted to bring up. I actually had brain surgery during this 10-year relationship for something that I never had. I know the chemical that she was using towards the end when the ultimate goal was to end me. But there was a period of time where I know she was doing something, but I don't know uh, as many details. But there was a rare condition that she had brain surgery for. I might have mentioned that in part one. And it was a very rare condition. It's a very real condition called Cushing's disease. Because she had had surgery for this and she tested for years, like she pushed and pushed doctors. That's the Munchausen spit. Um, she had to replace a lot of hormones for her endocrine system, and she had access to steroids on a daily basis. If you take steroids and you are testing for Cushing's disease, you will test falsely positive. With everything else that was happening, and my endocrine system just completely crapped out all of a sudden, right around the time we took conservatorship of my sister. So she's the one that had the $1 million. But right around that time, everything just went downhill really quickly. And she immediately flew me out to Beverly Hills to a doctor who only accepted cash. We were on the East Coast, so this was thousands of miles away. I had brain surgery at a huge institution in the United States. And there was one doctor before I had my brain surgery who was like, I won't do it. I don't think you have it. The way it works is your endocrinologist will diagnose you with the thing, and then you get a neurosurgeon who basically accepts the diagnosis, but they get their opinion too. But the thing is, she was dosing me with steroids. She had convinced me that I was too crazy and too sick to do my own med planner. And at this time, I was taking 20, 30 pills a day. It was no problem to slip in these steroids. And the way that the testing worked, she knew exactly when I was going to be taking the tests for this alleged thing that I needed brain surgery for. And I remember being in the hospital, again, at this huge institution in the United States. And I was not supposed to have any kind of endocrinology come down to see me because I had an external referral. But they came down and they were asking me lots and lots of questions. They did not believe that I had it. And also they biopsy everything that they removed from my endocrine, my pituitary gland. None of it tested positive for what they did the surgery for. None of it. So at the time, because doctors don't like to revert to, oh, you're being poisoned, they wrote it off as just a fluke. I mean, my ex-wife was great with doctors. She loved that attention for herself, and she loved getting it, by proxy. So she could sweet talk anyone, any doctor.
She's had a lot of experience in the hospitals herself anyway, so she probably knew a lot of the terminology inside and out.
Oh, yes.
And done a lot of research on probably medical backgrounds and medical problems. Do you think she'd done a thorough research on this particular poison beforehand? And also, did you think that she may have done this before?
I'm very transparent. When there's something about my story that I'm
Yeah,
like, "Oh, this is kind of a dot that
yeah,
I connected," or I'm not sure, I'm definitely honest
yeah.
about that. I don't know. I There has been a piece of me that has wondered when my dad was diagnosed with dementia, that's when we gained conservatorship and guardianship of my sister and my dad. I did
Mhm,
not remember what he had done at the time, but she spent a lot of time with him because I couldn't. All I knew was that I could not be around him. It was detrimental to my mental health. I mean, there were a lot of other things going on too, but I often wonder, did he talk to her about it? You know, demented. Also, who knows what his mental diagnoses were? Psychopathy,
mm,
malignant narcissist, something.
mm,
Did he just kind of share this information? Because I don't know that her goal was to end me the entire 10 years. At some point, she was just playing. She liked to watch. She liked watching me get sick. She liked the attention from the doctors.
yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, when it came to your dad, was she the main carer of him for a while?
So we always had him in like a nursing home or something like that because I couldn't be around him.
Yeah.
But she was the main one to transport him. She was the main one to deal with any financial things, of course.
Mm.
But yeah, she was the main one to deal with him because I just simply couldn't.
And so moving past the time that then obviously you realized what was happening once you came out of the situation and once you left her, did you ever contact her and confront her about what she was doing?
No, and so when I first left, there were a lot of people who said, your health got really good. You just lost 100 pounds in a few months. Do you think maybe she was, poisoning you?" And I was like, "Nah." It took me a while because you don't wanna believe it. Um, no, I did not confront her. I have not spoken to her since the day I left, besides in court, and I never spoke directly to her. I know that with narcissistic personalities, you do not confront them. It's detrimental to yourself. They're going to flip everything back on you. So no, I
Mm,
haven't reached out because there is absolutely no point. She has family on the Supreme Court of the state in which we were living.
mm,
Yeah. So I've been painted solidly as crazy. I mean, my story is pretty wild and difficult to wrap your mind around in and of itself. But she, with abuse and CPTSD and things like that, it is easy. They know your buttons, they know your triggers. It is easy for them to wind you up
yeah,
and make you look
yeah.
insane.
100%. And I do think with the narcissistic and sociopath behavior, they're very calm. There is no emotion attached to how they behave. So when well, I like to call us normal folk, as that's a bit that's a bit of a broad term, but people with compassion and empathy, we react with emotion, and sometimes that can be deemed as crazy. When
Mhm,
really, in reality, we can't make sense of what is being handed out to us.
mhm.
But I'm just more concerned that she might be going out there doing this to somebody else, and surely she should be locked up for her behaviour and what she's doing.
Absolutely, and at the same time that these things were happening to me, her father was having the same symptoms. And her mother is absolutely who created the narcissism, the Munchausen, all of the things. Her dad was having a lot of the same symptoms, and just like me, it was a mystery why he couldn't walk all of a sudden, why just random things, and mom was so cold and so callous. So there's a lot there to unpack. I
Mm,
agree. I don't think she should be, she just bought a new cozy house for herself. I have people who I don't watch her, I don't care, but I have people I'm just like, just let me know if there's anything I need to know about.
mm.
Just keep an eye out for me. Don't tell me otherwise. I don't care. But she just bought herself a new house and eh, the thing with people and that concerns me about this situation is that people are line steppers. Once it starts with that's why it starts with animals and then it moves on to humans. She has done this to a human. What's next? Who's next? It's concerning.
It is very concerning because her life to her doesn't seem to matter. And that is the promise of a good human being, is to have care
Right.
and not want to hurt another person. And you think she's doing it for a gain. And what does she gain from you from doing it? I think we might have touched on it a little bit in the last one, but we'll just repeat
Yeah.
that.
So for me, it was a combination. First of all, we met when I was 18 years old, and I had just taken control of my body. I felt good about myself, and she hated that. She was in a larger body herself. She had caused all of these medical conditions on herself. And she hated that. So she enjoyed seeing me swell up. She also enjoyed the attention that she was getting because she had a sick wife and she was sick. She was sick and having to take care of me. She also was going to gain that $1 million once she became conservator of my sister and I was out of the way, which she managed to funnel a good bit of it away in some ways that I don't know and in some ways that I witnessed her doing. But regardless, with me gone, she would have gained it all. No questions asked.
And that is her aim. That was her end goal,
Mhm.
allegedly. So we have to say that.
That's okay.
But with the funneling, is there not any way of getting that back if you
S
took her to court?
So I've thought about that, but I mean, the fact is I'm homeless. I have no money for, an attorney or anything like that, and with her family connection to the court in the state that we're in, I would absolutely love I have the medical records, I have pictures, I have videos that if I could just get a physician to look at it through a different lens, the
Yeah,
pieces all snap together. There's so
yeah,
many things that I would love to do, and
yeah.
so many people have reached out and said that they felt like this was happening to them. I feel like that this is a more common than we know thing, and I would love to see justice served, but I don't have the resources to do it.
Yeah, no, I completely
Yeah.
understand. I mean, hopefully she doesn't get away with what she's done, and there will be justice at some point, especially when you're back up on your feet, and you can put the wheels into motion. So when you left your wife, did you go into a shelter, or am I skipping too far forward?
Oh, no, this is perfect.
Okay, perfect.
So I had at the time a best friend who was very supportive, had done a lot of work in things like diversity, had worked in shelters before. And so I fled to her house 6 hours away. She had been very supportive and everything like that. So I did not actually end up in a shelter until a few months ago. I knew intuitively in my mind, whatever, that my complex PTSD was so bad because, again, I had just remembered my childhood months before I left my wife. I knew that I was so fragile at that moment and just didn't understand anything in the world or who to trust that if I had gone into a shelter, it would have ended me. I had struggled my entire life with wanting to end my own life since I was a teenager, and I had no idea why. Just that I was sad all the time. And so I understood that going into a shelter would have absolutely ended me, and I avoided it. It really, it's a privilege. I think that one of the things that I got from my dad that was actually good is a good dose of his charisma as a psychopath, which has served me well, honestly. And not that I've been manipulative, but it's just, opened up opportunities
Yeah.
outside of a
Mm.
shelter. So there were times that I was sleeping in my car. I've lived in, cheap motels, but largely I've been able to kind of couch surf over these past 2 years until April of this year. Um, it's
And go. Oh God, carry on, sir.
No, that's okay. I did want to mention one other thing that eh, there are a lot of predatory people out there. I've used social media over the past 2 years for a couple of reasons. I don't have any family in my life, so I have no one to embarrass, but also that means like no emergency contacts, things like that. So I have used social media to keep eyes on me to make sure I'm safe because in the United States, I don't know how it is there. There are droves of homeless people just disappearing, just disappearing. It's a whole problem. And so I've used it to keep eyes on me, also to make connections, but to stay safe. But there are a lot of predatory people out there who see someone, especially like I was early in the 2 years with just like basically a child looking through, and they have preyed upon that. And one of those situations was actually in Florida last summer, and it was someone that I had known since second grade. This wasn't even someone that I met on social media who was like, I want to help you. I want to take care of you. I drive all the way down there, and I pretty quickly understood communal narcissist. I saw how she was abusive to her husband and manipulative to her husband. And slowly but surely, she took away my opportunities to get resources. She convinced me I couldn't drive my car down there, that I had to use hers. There were just lots of things. And the worst part is she has a doctorate in psychology. She literally does psychotherapy on people, but she would look at me and say, I only got my degree, my doctorate, so I can manipulate people. And that's one of those things that we don't talk about enough, where when people tell you who they are, I know we say that when people tell you who they are, believe you, but even
Yeah.
like that, when people tell you who they are,
Wow.
it was a really
Wow.
bad situation. It took me 6 months to get out of, and it almost did not end well. So I just go ahead.
No, carry on. No, so I just can't believe that somebody would do that. And it's almost that they can smell your vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that is where you have to sieve out the good from the bad. And actually, it seems to be that there is a lot worse in the world than there is good sometimes. I mean,
Sometimes.
what do you think happens to the homeless people that do go missing? Because that's quite an interesting comment to make.
So I don't know. There are hypotheses. There's a problem with the industrialization of the prison system here in America. It's for profit, and they can literally use people. Slavery is illegal unless you're in prison, and then you can become a slave. You're working for pennies on the hour. It's just free labor for these for-profit prison systems. So there's perhaps some of it's being funneled into there. Honestly, there's a huge problem with trafficking, with human trafficking, and I would bet that that's where a lot of it's going. And the thing is, there are a lot of people, not to go into politics or anything. I'm not going to talk about either side, but a lot of politicians are like, "Look, we've cleaned up the streets." But it's like, you just made people disappear. You didn't clean anything up. These people are just gone now and had no one to look after them.
And where you're situated, would you say that the homelessness has got worse throughout the years?
It has definitely gotten worse.
Mm.
And just very recently, the Supreme Court ruled that it is illegal to sleep on the street. So if you are sleeping on the street in the United States, you will literally be taken to prison. And again, I just talked about the industrialization of that the prison system and the slave
Mm.
labor that we employ. So if you can't sleep on the streets because you don't, it just makes no sense. So yeah, it's gotten
Yeah.
a lot worse.
Yeah, because we have a different system in England. It's taxpayer pays for the prisons here, whereas yours are privatized. And you know, there are talks of sending prisoners here to Estonia, which I just can't really fathom how that would work.
Mm-mm.
And they are looking also to privatize, and they're not looking to, but they talk a lot about privatizing the health service. And I think once we go
Mm.
down that route, we're into a world of corruption, aren't we? And that's how I feel a lot of these private corporations work. So it does sadden me that, you know, the most vulnerable in society are not getting what they need. And there
Mhm.
should be a lot more help there for people that have fallen on hard times. It happens to the best of us. It really
Yeah.
does.
And you mentioned the medical system, and I'm not grateful that she hurt me, obviously, but I was so healthy before this. I had no idea what people with actual chronic illnesses, all of these things, what they had to deal with, the medical gaslighting, the years of waiting to see a specialist, all of these horrible things. And I am grateful that I had that experience in many ways because it was a special kind of hell.
Yes, I know. I can imagine. And not doctors not really knowing what was happening to you.
And
Um,
blaming me
yeah.
for my weight that was soaring because I was being poisoned. Everything was blamed on my weight. Congestive heart failure in my 30s, it's your weight.
And
You're
I
not
know
gonna.
fluid on the body is very dangerous.
Mhm.
And they do have to drain it off of you. Did they have to keep doing that to you?
I was on diuretics and
Okay.
a ton
Yeah.
of other medications. So
Mm. So when you went to skipping back to the shelter,
yes.
how long were you there for?
So in April of this year, my car actually caught on fire with all of my belongings in it
Oh
because I'd
no.
been carrying my belongings around for 2 years in my car. So
Mm.
everything I owned went up in flames with it. And I was stuck in, can I say the state that I was in? I know I can't say the city. Okay.
Yeah, go for
I
it.
was stuck in Utah,
Mhm.
which I'd never wanted to go to. That's a long story I won't go into. Just a weird story. It's nothing super interesting, but um, I ended up in this city in Utah. I did not know it was the most fundamental Mormon city. So like the fundies, those people of the Mormons, the really hardcore ones. I remember when I first got there, I would sit and look out the window because I was house sitting for someone for a little bit. And I don't know. I don't know how to describe the things that I witnessed there, but it was just bizarre and frightening. I would just watch people walk down the street and I was like, I don't know what this is, but I feel uneasy. Um, and so anyway, eventually I ended up in the shelter because I had no vehicle, no way to leave. And it was a very well-to-do shelter. When I like fully stocked pantry, anything you like. I used to make fresh granola. I used to go to the garden and pick kale for my salads in the morning. Nothing like any other shelter that I've ever heard of.
Sounds
I did.
lovely.
It does sound lovely until you get to what's below. But I started to notice that, like, the granite countertops and the industrial stainless steel appliances in the kitchen, they had all these things. Yet we were stacked like sardines on top of each other in the bedroom. And then I started to notice all of the church groups that they would bring and show around. And I was like, oh, communal narcissism on a grand level here. You're showing these church groups, look at these things that we're providing for these women, not showing them that there is no space for us to heal at all. There was no place to have privacy there.
Mm.
So that's step one. There were a lot of weird things there that, for one thing, they never took a social security number or an ID. Now, I've heard that sometimes shelters like that won't take a social security number, even if they are reporting to like other government agencies, which this one was. They were getting funding through a government agency, but these places always work with you to get your ID. If you don't have an ID, they work with you to get it so that because you're at a trafficking shelter or a domestic violence shelter, like things can happen to you. They want to know who you are. This place did not care. There were people going by their non-government names there, which again is fine, but there was just nothing. There was no trace of me being there. There was a park across the street that they were always like, "Oh, you can go to this park," which was attached to a library, and they're always like, "Yeah, go over there." They encouraged us all to go over there all the time. Like, that's where you can find privacy. That's where you can find quiet. Why in this huge building with all of these nice things they couldn't have provided some privacy for us? I don't know. But at first I thought, maybe this was weird, maybe it was just me, and I started hearing a lot of other people say this. Now, again, this was a shelter for trafficking survivors. So we've been through this. Every time I'd go to the park, there was just I felt like like one day I remember there was a man walking around me in circles in the pavilion to the point that I readjusted my posture. I stared him dead in the eyes, like all the things that you need to do to assert yourself to be like, no, you don't want to mess with me. And then I started hearing other people, I thought, well, maybe I'm just crazy. This is just weird. No, it's probably intuition. But when I started hearing other people talk about strange things, and when I say other people, I mean just about everybody that was in the shelter, happening to them at the park, happening to them at the library. It's also right next to the most well-known trafficking interstate in the entire United States. The Mormon Church has also actually been documented as trafficking people through it. So, especially children. Of course, that's on the hush hush.
Allegedly.
Right. Allegedly. Yes. Thank you. Allegedly. But the thing that there were a lot of parallels. I was raised Pentecostal on the East Coast, and there were a lot of parallels between the Mormon Church because it's that high control, very indoctrinated religion.
Mm.
But the biggest one that I saw, and the most frightening thing that I saw, was that in places like West Virginia, in the Pentecostal church, our kind of programming, our trauma, all the things, the fire and brimstone, it's right there. It's on the face. Like you can see it coming. We're going to come at you and we're going to tell you you're going to hell and we're going to tell you why. With the Mormons, it was all done with a smile. Their trauma from their indoctrination is pushed so far down. So they are kind of collectively like the typical narcissistic, abusive partner who
Mm.
walks up to you and says, "I'm doing this for your own good." And so one day, I witnessed there were only 2% of the city was Black, was anything but white, actually. And one day I observed staff very aggressively coming into a public space and exhibiting some racist behavior that could have potentially been dangerous towards one of the only Black individuals in the shelter. And at first, I was just going to try to report the situation. I was going to call the hotline. I thought maybe I could file a grievance. But then and I saw her just like walk out. She started the conversation. This woman started to ask very direct questions. The staff was like, oh no, this conversation's going nowhere, and just walked out. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to talk to her white woman to white woman. Like, let's just try. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. I went into the office. She had also done something that she was insisting that I blow past my boundaries and be nice to a specific person who did not sit well with me and like internally in my body. And I am learning to trust that 100% of the time. And I was
Mm,
right. But she had told me to be nice. And I was like, niceness is fake. Kindness comes from within. No, you're not telling me to blow past my boundaries. This is not healing. I've been doing this for 2 years. And I went in to talk to her and I started to tell her how what she had done could be potentially dangerous to a Black person, especially in a public space with a lot of traumatized white women. And she immediately started just freaking out and would not let me talk. I told her 4 times, let me speak. And she clearly was not going to. So I got up and walked out. And I asked her who was above her. And she taunted me, made fun of me the entire time that I was walking out of the office. And so I kept trying to report this. I kept trying to report it to different staff. No one would listen. Everyone made excuses for her. Maybe she was tired. And I said, did you ask if the Black woman was tired? Like, did you ask if this resident was tired? No. And so finally, I took it to the executive director. I did not know that the executive director belonged to one of the richest Mormon families in the entire state of Utah. When I went to the executive director, I got the feeling that she was gaslighting me. But again, sometimes you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes you don't have a choice. So I explained to her, I broke it down very clearly why it was an issue, what was going on. And she immediately said, could you please tell the resident that I'm a safe person to talk to? Which was a red flag for me, because when people have to tell you that how safe they are, when people have to tell you how good they are, they're
mm,
probably trying to convince you because their actions don't match.
mm,
So in any event, she did absolutely nothing. She promised me that she would have a discussion with this staff to set expectations. I'm still unclear what those expectations were: not to be racist, not to silence survivors of trafficking. I understand HR talk. I've worked in HR before. Like, I understand you can only say so much, but
mm,
she promised me she'd have a conversation. And she did not. Later that day, she was like, oh, sorry, she's coming onto staff, but I have to go pick up my kids. I got to go. So, but then she made another promise. You will not have to interact with this staff, period, as long as it's not an emergency. That night, that staff busts into my room. Every chance she got, she was confronting me, which I reported back to the executive director again, who again did absolutely nothing. So I kept trying to report this. And this time I was trying to report the executive director for her compliance. And no one would listen. So I spent a month trying to figure it out. And one day I thought, what the heck? I'll just take one more go at it. And some staff actually told me how to officially, the executive director had told me that any report would go directly to her. So I'm
mm,
like, why would I report this? And also, I forgot to mention the hotline. I did end up calling the hotline the night that I tried to address the issue with the staff. And they told me over and over, I called twice, and they told me both times, um, we need your name so we can give it to the staff. What? It wasn't just filing a grievance. It was, your information will be given back to the staff. That's not safe at all. And so then I had that discussion with the executive director. She said, oh, no, that's not true. She said, the reports come to me. That wasn't true either. The reports actually go to HR. So eventually I found out how to file a grievance, and I filed 2, one against the staff and one against the executive director, for the things that she failed to do and the way that she upheld this behavior. And the next day, all of a sudden, when I had excelled, I had done everything that I needed to do. I had checked in with my caseworker. I had plans. I was following all the rules. I was helping people in ways that their staff didn't know how to. All of a sudden, the next day after I filed this grievance through HR, guess what? We're worried about you. We're worried that you're not making any progress. And again, because it's Mormon run, they did it with a smile. They
Yeah.
Darvoed the situation, made me the problem, and did it with a smile.
It's almost like referencing, if I'm going to reference it to the Emoji film. Have you seen the Emoji film?
No.
Oh, well, there's the emoji that's always smiling, but she's evil. And she runs
Mm,
around trying to hurt everybody. Did
yes.
it not make your time there really difficult that you were going up against the institution? Because I feel like when anyone does that, they make problems for that individual.
Absolutely. And the thing is, that's wild. I was not supposed to be there. I didn't qualify to be there. And so when I went to, I preliminarily went and talked to someone because I did not want to go to a shelter again. I was 2 years out at this point, and I still was like, this is going to be really difficult. So I talked to someone, and she was the person who screened me in was a children's advocate. She did not do this process very often, but it just so happened that this day she was filling in for someone was sick. So she screened me in, but it was only for emergency. It was only for people who had immediately left. So I have 2 years of intensive healing under my belt. Like that's pretty much all I've done for 2 years is deconstruct my own situation and figure out how to be alive and to be happy. So immediately, actually it was the staff who was bullying the Black resident immediately was like, oh, you're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be here. This is only for emergency people. No one in the shelter was from that state either. Very few people were from that state. It was weird. It was strange.
And what was their kind of program? How did they help you? Or try to
Um
help people? And what was their kind of, did they have like a step-by-step kind of therapy in any way?
No. Actually, I was trying to get something started where I'd offer like tools to address the physical manifestation of trauma. And they were like, no, you can do that on your own time. Like, keep doing it because our staff doesn't know what to do, but we're not letting you do it. No, they didn't offer anything. The things that they did were offer, like, I mean, it's great that there was food and shelter. Don't get me wrong. Like, having your basic needs met is a huge layer of less trauma. Being poor and not knowing where you're going to sleep or how you're going to eat, that's perpetual constant trauma. But they didn't really do anything, quite honestly, looking back. There was no regimented program. You met with your caseworker every week. You went over some goals, and as long as you were working towards the goals, that was fine. I was one of the only people there making any income. I was one of the only people there who wasn't sleeping all the time. Like, people went in, and again, this was a really nice shelter. People went in, and the depression that overtook them was really bad. And I think it was just the institution itself. So there was really no help unless it was through that institution itself, which was through the Mormons. And it was like, look, they could turn around and say, look what we did for them. Look at what we provided. We helped with a month of rent, or we did this, or we did that. But as far as like helping, nothing.
So do you think that they were hiding behind something to basically fundamentally launder money through, maybe? I mean, it does make you question how or why they were doing that if there was not another program in place. If it was just for food and for shelter, there was nothing else going on there. They must have been getting a significantly higher pay from the government to have you girls there.
I have a lot of theories on this, and I hope I can say them all because I'm going to say them. You
Might
can
as
edit them
well.
out if you need to.
We can give our opinion. That's not an
Yeah.
issue. Yeah.
So one thing that struck me as odd is there was an entire food industry, like food production industry, that the Church of Latter-day Saints had created to funnel in food into the church. It was like we had church yogurt, we'd call it church yogurt as a joke, butter, all these things. And I spent so much time wondering if you are going to create an entire company, a production company to package food, to send food, and these weren't donations, this was an actual company. Why aren't you fixing the problem instead? Why do you keep putting so much money into this instead of fixing the problem and just making resources available for people? communal narcissism. Look at what we're doing. Look at how we're helping these sad, sad people. Also, if I am being completely honest, which I usually am, I think that they were using the trafficking shelter to traffic people.
Wow.
I honestly
Allegedly.
do. Allegedly. I started to add that and I was like, I said I think. So
Because
allegedly. Because the social security number and the ID, we didn't exist.
yeah.
So many of us were running. So many of us had those bad feelings about the places that they encouraged us to go. They also started asking me really weird questions and trying to pull really weird stuff on me once everything kind of blew up before I was able to get out. Um, Actually, the way that I was able to get out is I have an ex-Mormon friend. I have some ex-Mormon friends, and one who was in northern Utah and said, "Oh my God, Cassie, do you know who you've made angry?" And she said, "Here are my airline points. Get the hell out of the state." So,
Wow.
but I think that there were a lot of strange things that happened in there, and people just, I mean, in shelters in general, there are allegedly issues with people being trafficked out of them in many, many shelters.
And to most shelters, because what did they? Well, obviously, we can't name them. But they would have hidden behind a veil of helping women from fleeing from domestic violence. I'm guessing,
And
right? That would
trafficking.
be and trafficking.
Mm.
So there would have had to have been more than just food and shelter met. They would have had to have other things in place. And considering they didn't is a big red flag.
That's true.
Were there a lot of people there when you were there? I mean, were there hundreds or was it a few dozen?
It was a small shelter. It was, I don't know, probably about 20 people at any given time, maybe a little more. Um, but they got so much information from us about our personal lives because it was so small. And if you think about the population that they were allegedly serving, people who were fleeing abusers or fleeing traffickers, and only emergency, only immediate, except with me being the exception who slid under the radar, they were not expecting me. That's when you, looking back to myself when I got out of my marriage, just that alone, how vulnerable I was then. I'm
Mm,
still vulnerable, obviously, because I don't quite understand danger, but how vulnerable I was then. They are expecting the most vulnerable of vulnerable women to show up at this shelter. And people who haven't had time to process any of their trauma, who haven't deconstructed of why these things happened.
mm, mm.
So
'Cause I'm
it's
just
advantageous. Mm.
it's interesting to see that I know there are a lot of churches that provide this help. But do you think the Mormons had too much power within the state? And were they regulated by anyone?
So I have two answers to that. First, I want to address a lot of the churches in the United States, especially helping with this.
Okay.
And I am an ex-evangelical, so I am trying not to bring my personal bias into this. This is a lot of lived experiences I've heard from other people too. And I'm not saying this exclusively. I'm not in any way saying all churches are bad, any religion is bad. But when you have churches assisting vulnerable populations like this, and they have things to gain, like people to recruit in some of the higher control religions. Um, there's a they get, the taxes in the United States. They don't have to pay taxes. There's a lot of that happens. There's a lot of predatory behavior by many religious institutions and helping those vulnerable people in the United States. And again, I'm not saying that across the board, but you
Mm,
see that and you hear that over and over and over again outside of my own personal experience. Now,
mm,
the Mormons, the thing that I found interesting, I started looking for a pro bono attorney. There was a way that I could have reported them to the Department of Human Services, I believe it was, because they do have allegedly governing institutions over them, which is why the Social Security number thing was weird.
mm,
But the thing that you have to understand about Utah is Brigham Young. I don't know. I probably can't say that. The thing that you have to understand about Utah is that there's a huge university there that educates probably 90% of the attorneys in the state. So if you find an attorney who was not educated by this Mormon run facility, that they're
mm,
probably too afraid to actually stand up to the church because there is so much money in that church,
mm,
so much money. But that is if you can find one who wasn't educated there, but more than likely you're just running anywhere you try to report something, you're just reporting it to someone who is falling in line with the evil that's already happening. Like I've never felt so I want to say I've never felt so helpless for about a month that I kept trying to report the instances of racism and the instances of silencing survivors. Um, I heard stories from other survivors that similar things had happened with that same staff and that executive director. No one had a way to speak up. And yeah,
What do you think they gained by doing what they did to these vulnerable women?
I
What was
think
their end goal?
there,
Sorry.
no, that's okay. I think that a lot of it is the communal narcissist piece, which I should probably kind of define that just in case not everyone knows
Yeah,
what that
go
is.
for it. Yeah, yeah, go for it.
So communal narcissism is you see a lot of the people who give huge amounts to charities, and not saying that they're all doing it out of this reason, but communal narcissism is kind of a way to pay for your morality in that you give money or resources to someone who's needing of them only to make yourself look good. So it's again like typical narcissism. It's about that appearance, it's about that outward. And so I think a lot of that was the church hiding behind that guise, or not, maybe not the whole Mormon church. Again, I don't like blanket statements, but
Yeah.
she was very powerful.
Mm.
The executive director was. I think that a lot of it was that communal narcissism. Look what we're doing. There were paper articles written about that specific shelter, like it's well publicized. And then if there was trafficking, the human body is the most renewable resource on the entire planet. And I
Mm.
hate saying that. It's kind of my go-to quote, but like it's so true. It is so true. And another thing that they didn't count on with me is the Pentecostal church and those parallels, and me having been part of my trafficking, been through the Pentecostal church. Like I've seen everything that they were pulling, just on a different and poor level.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. It's hard to go through that, and it's almost gaslighting you consistently, to the point where you do think, you question your own sanity, don't you? Um,
Quite honestly,
yeah,
the only times that I questioned my own sanity after I left my ex-wife, after I realized, "Oh my god, my life, I need to deconstruct this. I need to figure this out." The only times that I've questioned my sanity were when I ran into abusive people again.
yeah, yeah, because they do make you question yourself, and you actually question your own memory, which is bizarre to say the least. You will think, did that really happen? And paranoia sets in, and all other kind of weird and wonderful feelings come flooding through.
Mhm.
So when you eventually left the shelter, and how did you get out of there, and what was your next kind of move?
So, when I left the shelter, like I said, my friend in northern Utah was like, "Get the hell out. Here are my airline points." I was able to collect some money from mutual aid, and I was able to make it to West Virginia, where I almost ended up in a shelter again. And in West Virginia, shelter is a whole other flavor of trauma because it's already so poor there. But I learned a lot about the processes of shelters. And even in West Virginia, they take things like your information, your social security number, and they actually have programs to try to help you get back on your feet.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's actionable or actually works, I doubt it, but that the programs are in place. The
Yes.
safety precautions are in place. And West Virginia didn't work out. I can tell you off air where I am, but I'm not gonna disclose what
Yeah.
state I'm in right now.
Mm.
But yeah,
And what's the worst thing that happened in that shelter with the Mormons? What can you tell us, kind of any detail on one specific thing?
I think that the worst thing, honestly, was understanding that they were able to silence me. I'm a loudmouth. I've been healing for 2 years. I was working on closing that people pleasing era of my life at that moment. But knowing how much work I've put into just myself over the past 2 years, just myself, and that most people aren't afforded that opportunity or that consciousness or anything like that. Understanding the power that they had to silence me, that I had to flee the state. I just walked out of the shelter with a backpack with my sister's ashes in it and a suitcase. Did not tell them I was leaving. I just left. I left all of my things there. that I had been able to rebuild from my car catching on fire. I barely have any clothes, but that that they could silence someone who had come as far as me. That's the scariest thing, I think, because how many other people are they silencing? How many people have they silenced? How many people have they harmed, allegedly?
I think you don't question an institution when you are in such a vulnerable frame of mind either. It's very difficult to deal with that on top of your own trauma. So you've done
Mm,
well for going up against them.
yeah.
Do you think that they are that they're running a better practice now? Have you heard any more about their how they've moved forward?
No, I doubt that they are running a better practice. I would assume that they've probably implemented new rules. There were a few people that I kept in contact with, and then all of a sudden the contact just stopped, which again, it could just be shelter life. You kind of learn the practice of impermanence living in a shelter and just seeing people come and go. But these were people that I was pretty close to, and all of a sudden there's no contact. So I don't know. I doubt that there's better practice. They've probably just changed the rules to make me look crazy and to prevent anyone from speaking up further.
Would you say that would you consider these Mormons radical Mormons, or the extreme side? Because I think there are levels of Mormons that have less extreme beliefs and values. What would you say they were?
So this was, and I did not know this until I left. This specific part of Utah that I was in was the most fundamental, so
Okay.
radical place in there. I didn't see that immediately because I don't know anything about
Mm.
Mormons or
No.
didn't.
Mm.
Um, which is actually kind of a telling thing that I was able to pick up so much when I went in there. And this is the story that I have, going in not knowing anything about them and witnessing all of this with fresh eyes. But yeah, they were some of the more radical ones, and apparently it's allegedly the most racist area.
That's what I was going to ask you. You think they're inherently racist, and you just answered the question for me. So
Actually,
that
part of the Mormon theology is that people with black skin are evil. I forget how it was.
no way.
Yeah. There are talking
No.
points for them to kind of talk around it at this point, but that is in the theology that black people, they can come to the other side, but people with black skin are inherently evil. And of course, they try to wrap it up and put a bow on it, but
Dangerous mindset to be in, and it's a real shame that there are these warped fanatics out there.
mm,
I struggle to comprehend it in this day and age, really. So I'm glad you was able to get away from them. So when you got out of the state, what happened?
I fled back to West Virginia. I mean, I had to make a decision so quickly, and I literally have roots nowhere. I've been I mean, I've kinda had to be running for 2 years, but in the process, I've had this wonderful to kind of, flip my perspective a little. It's been hard being homeless and having to run across the United States, but I'm gonna get choked up. It's been really cool to be able to witness and experience so many of the things, and I have
Okay.
my sister's ashes,
Yeah.
and, my sister was basically held hostage in her body by my dad, and so she never got to go anywhere, and it just makes me really happy that I brought her to
Yeah.
see all of these
That's
cool
it's
places in
great.
the United States. Not ideal situation, but we literally drove from coast to coast together. She
That's
got to ride
lovely.
on an airplane for the first time.
It's lovely, and it's such a big homage to her, isn't it? That you're able to do that, and she's always with you anyway. They
Absolutely.
don't think they leave us; they are with us wherever we
Absolutely.
go. I mean, what would you say to people that have gone through what you've been through? I mean, how would you help somebody in this if they were in this situation?
I'm glad you're asking this because it's actually something that I am working on to sustain myself, but I have a problem monetizing this information because I know that I had to come up with these tools and these ideas on my own when I had no money and I was homeless and running. The first part, the main part is radical self-love. Start by understanding that even your bad pieces that you would consider bad, that the behaviors that you have that aren't good, hold yourself accountable, But those pieces were created, those behaviors were created for a reason in childhood to keep you safe. They do not serve you well anymore. So as you deconstruct, just love yourself, love those pieces, understand that those pieces of yourself, of your fractured psyche, they played a part. Love them, give them the love that they needed. And then I cannot emphasize enough radical self love and also holding yourself accountable. But then do not turn. I think that one of the biggest disservices that we've done to humanity is the way that we have commodified the entire healing process. So a lot of the healing gurus and things that you see, you look to these people for answers and you're like, oh, how can I do it? And they give you the answer, but they don't give you necessarily the process. So you have to keep coming back. Tools that are offered will only work if a person is authentic and uses them in ways that are applicable to their lives. That's why diets don't work so often. So when people tell you you have to heal a certain way, no, you don't. You do not. In fact, that's the problem. And that's the whole reason we have all gotten into this situation. So take tools and make them your own. And then, last but certainly not least, start learning to trust yourself and the way that people, how your body feels when you're around certain people. That's the thing that a lot of things disconnect us from. That's the thing that trauma disconnects us from and tells us not to trust. When you feel something and you're around someone and it's that quiet, silent feeling, listen to that. You don't have to act on it immediately, but start listening to yourself. I actually have a lot of tools that help people to find ways to trust themselves again, because that's where our power is. That's where our healing is. It's in ourselves. It's not how anyone else tells us how to do it. It's how we adjust things and how we become authentically ourselves.
I think you're completely right with everything you've said. It's a big journey learning who you are anyway. So with all the trauma involved, it kind of stunts it, doesn't it? And it
Absolutely.
takes you back to if you're 10 steps forward and you go 20 steps back. So I understand it's a more of a challenge to get where to the safe space in your own head
Yes.
when you've been through such a horrific time. Is there, if you could tell your younger self anything right now, what would you tell that younger self?
It has taken a long time. I'm 41 years old now. It has taken me 41 years to love myself, maybe 40 years to love myself, but to truly love myself and to truly facilitate a safe place for myself and that inner child that was so wounded. I would tell my inner child or myself when I was a kid, you are not crazy. You are not crazy. You are the furthest thing from crazy. And anyone who tells you that you are and doesn't mean it in a loving way is trying to gaslight you into not speaking. I think that would be the number one thing.
Putting the pieces together and and really solidifying your own thoughts. Do you ever feel like um with I feel like with healing, it's not a linear process. It's up and down all the time. So when you do have your bad days, and I'm sure there are times when you think upon the past and it kind of eats away sometimes, and invades your happy thoughts.
Mhm.
What do you do to get back to a good place? Because I think sometimes it's good to share how we deal with it, to help each other get back to a happy medium rather than feeling completely bogged down by our trauma.
Agreed. So it is a process, and it has been a process. I'm going to use the word positive affirmations. I think that sometimes they can be a little bit of a bypassing where people just use them and just say these happy things so that they can't see the darkness. But if you use positive affirmations appropriately and you just practice saying things out loud, like, I am worthy, you won't believe it at first. But eventually, psychologically speaking, spiritually speaking, all of these things start to line up and eventually you will believe it. So when I have a really horrible day at this point, the because often the things that we hear in our heads that are you suck, you're less than, you are unworthy, you don't deserve air, are just the voices and the echoes of people from our past saying those things. They're not our voice. And so when I hear those things, I'm finally in a place where I can readjust and say, you know what? No. You did great. Like, or this was an opportunity for improvement. But it all started with that radical self-love and radical self-acceptance. And again, you don't believe it when you start the process, but just trying to, and I hesitate to say shift your perspective or adjust your thoughts, because a lot of times that concept is weaponized. Like, we're out here telling people who are homeless, who have nothing, who are about to lose even more things, shift your perspective, quit being so negative. Like, no, 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 no.
It's all
It,
in context, isn't it? Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
And to change your perspective is not going to immediately change your physical world. And there are a lot of things stacked against people, but learning to treat yourself with love and to kind of almost push against those negative thoughts with self-love, I think, is how I've gotten out of a lot of my bad days, and it took 2 years.
Well, well done you. You've done absolutely fantastically, and
Thank you.
you should be really proud of yourself for coming this far.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to add?
I think the last thing I'd like to add,
Mm.
and this is, partially because I myself am a homeless woman. This is the most secure I've been in a while, and I know where I'm going to sleep for a month in a camper. And like, I am grateful and excited for that. Don't get me wrong. But with homeless people, especially in America, I don't know how it is there. We see them and we think that they've done something to put themselves in this position. We say that they've used drugs. We say all of these things, but we don't stop and zoom out and consider the fact that what if all of these things that we're accusing them of are actually symptoms of a larger, more traumatic, systemically traumatic, generationally traumatic issues. A lot of times that's why substance use disorder happens. I mean, yes, maybe there's a genetic component, but it gets activated by trauma. Um, People who are homeless have most of the time not done anything to put themselves into this position. It has been unfortunate situation after unfortunate situation. And if we would stop and listen to their stories, I'll bet there are a lot more stories like mine.
I think you're completely right. You have to you can't just judge a book by its cover, and you do need
Mm.
to chip away at what the scenario is. Nobody starts off in life with bad mental health, or with, all these life issues thrown at them. It's a gradual process, and you will see someone down the street that may look like that they are strung out, and you would just call them a drug addict. And nonchalantly say it, but there's always a history, and there's always a reason to how they got there, and we do need to show a lot more compassion. And I think
Mhm.
your platforms are really helpful. So do you just want to tell the listeners what your platforms are, and I mean what
Sure.
your goal is, if you've got a goal in mind to where you want to be in the next sort of 5 years?
Yeah, sure. So I am on TikTok. I started on TikTok. It's Appalachian Rising. I think there might be a little Taurus bull after Appalachian Rising. I can't remember, but I started deconstructing kind of narcissistic abuse and kind of grew from there and kept going and saw a lot of other issues. I'm on Instagram, also Appalachian Rising. I think it's Appalachian underscore
We'll put the
Rising.
links in the description box, don't worry.
Perfect. I also have a podcast. It's probably not for everyone because it's a little like anti-establishment, like systemic deconstruction, called Come Over to My House. Come Over to My House. The podcast is also accompanied by a photo series that I created over the past 2 years, navigating homelessness and finding moments of beauty within chaos. I'm also on Patreon. And so my goal is actually to be able to offer services to people. I want to be able to do this to sustain myself. Not only do I have a degree in human behavior, but I have studied a lot of art, music. I have a lot of out of the box ideas about healing and how to offer tools, not so that they have to keep coming back to me, but to empower individuals to actually do it themselves and to not have to come back to me. So my goal is I'm trying to create some sort of platform and some sort of modalities to offer these tools to people, and in turn to be able to help financially sustain myself, because with complex PTSD as bad as mine is and a lot of other things, it's really difficult for me to find employment. And there are a lot of reasons that people can't find employment right now. Who am I kidding? But that's my goal, is to financially sustain through helping and empowering other people and teaching other. I actually have a business idea about it that I'm working on getting in front of the right eyes, but And in turn, this idea would help other people do the same for themselves to financially sustain themselves.
It's wonderful, and you're making good out of the life that you've had, and I think that's an incredible thing to do. How do you feel now? I mean, you went through that family trauma when you was younger. You watched your mum die. Your dad allowed you to be abused, and then your ex-wife, did the same thing to you and poisoned you. I mean, you could write a book.
I am.
Well, there you go.
That's what my
Brilliant.
Patreon's about.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, you've survived such adversity. I mean, in your heart, what would you say? Would you say that your past has given you as in a positive way, and to make something positive out of what's happened?
For the first time in my life, when I was 39, when I left my ex-wife, I had internal happiness. I have found what it means to be happy, what it means to be joyous, what it feels like to be at peace. I talked about not wanting to be alive from the time I was a teenager until I was 39, and that has stopped. I am happy for the first time. And, there's a Sigmund Freud quote that says something along the lines of before you go diagnosing yourself with depression, and make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. And
Love that.
literally, that has yeah, that is what has happened. I changed my environment, I changed the people, and I started looking at myself, holding myself accountable too. Like there's the thing that I think that a lot of us don't understand when we look at ourselves. First of all, accountability is not blame. Accountability is just accepting, yeah, I did this thing, period. There might be reasons you did it, that's fine. They might be valid reasons. But holding yourself accountable is so uncomfortable at first. But the growth and the happiness and the dopamine that comes after you've worked through that, and you're like, oh, yeah, I've worked through that, is incredible
Yeah.
and so worth.
Yes, 100%. And when you start noticing patterns in what you're drawn to and who you're drawn to, then you can really then put the brakes on when you start seeing the red flags again and go, hold on a minute. I've
Yeah.
seen your type before. I think I'm gonna run away from it.
Yes,
And it takes a while to get to that point, doesn't it?
it does.
But you've done incredible. So, and thank you so much for joining us. I will put all the links in the description box. And we'll keep in contact. I just want to see,
Yes.
how you're getting on, and we could always do another podcast, later on in the year,
That
and
sounds great.
see how you're getting on with your housing and with your business ventures. So good
Thank you
luck with
so much.
everything.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
this opportunity.
No, it's been brilliant having you on. Thank you for coming on, and well, good luck with everything, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.